She was so significant and so powerful that the church had to turn her into a demon-possessed, sexual frenzied, hysterical woman that needed help. There are very few spiritual figures that are more iconic than Mary Magdalene. Everything about Mary is obscured and shrouded in mystery. For instance, many people believe that she is clearly Middle Eastern and from the Middle East. Yet, many people believe that she is clearly of Celtic origins. And yet, even the role she plays in Yeshua, her divine counterpart's life, is obscured. Was she a lower level initiate into the female mysteries? Or was she such a high level initiate into the female mysteries that it would not do for the storyline? You cannot have an advanced spiritual female mystic who is above the would-be savior. Or was she Yeshua's financier who was able to host him in different cities and have different events because she was able and wealthy enough to arrange for him to be there? So you see how there's these different roles that she could possibly play to her divine counterpart, Yeshua. But there's a through line here, and that's all that she wasn't a prostitute. So naturally, because she was an initiate of the female mysteries and possibly even coming from a wealthy family who could help spread Yeshua's mission, and they were even counterparts working together, she was called a whore. She was so significant and so powerful that the church had to turn her into a demon-possessed, sexual frenzied, hysterical woman that needed help. To be fair, there's also an esoteric layer to this story, and that is one of the hero's journey, because we do not know the historical significance of Mary. And historically, everything about her has been literally so obscured on purpose because of how powerful she was. But beyond the historical part of Mary, there is the esoteric story that Mary is the vessel carried out through. And so because of that, the esoteric significance of Mary is that she is the full 360 hero's journey. Mary was an initiate of the dragon lineage. That is a mystery school lineage from Atlantis that taught how to fully awaken the Kundalini energy and enter higher consciousness. So you have on one hand the historical Mary. And the historical Mary was one that was such a high level mystery school initiate, and she was such a high level high priestess that she actually was able to defeat the archonic powers here on earth and even teach her counterpart, Yeshua. Yeshua and her were on a divine mission together. So Yeshua helped and taught Mary, and Mary helped and taught Yeshua. They were perfect partners, meaning that they were fully equal in the way that they would teach each other, all for the sake of both their divine mission together. But the esoteric layer of Mary is taught more so as, I said, the hero's journey. And in the hero's journey, we only know one part. And that's the part where Yeshua taught and led her. So in the esoteric significance of Mary, what you'll see is that when Yeshua is releasing 7 seals from her, what that actually means is that the 7 planets that govern the human physical energy field, so that you have the physical body, and then you have different layers or templates over that. The 7 seals that Yeshua had taken out and cleared from Mary are the 7 planetary spheres, because each of the 7 planets in esoterica are not just seen as planets. They represent spiritual dimensions. So the planet Mercury represents a spiritual dimension, meaning a spiritual realm. all of the archetype of Mercury. So all of its 360-degree archetype. Its shadow archetype side and its positive archetype side and everything in between is that realm. And then you have that for Jupiter, you have that for Saturn, you have that for Venus, and so on and so forth. Each of the 7 planets in esoterica represent a specific influence. Now, in Gnostic thought, these influences were more than just planetary archetypal influences. They were even a specific archon. So the different planets were also considered different gateways with an archon in charge of each of those planets, or an archon in charge of each of those realms, aka gateways. And so even though the planets are more than that, they have a gravity to them. You could look at it that way. So they have a specific challenge or a specific strong influence that we would call here in our experience like a program. That's how strong the influence is. It's more than just an influence. It's like a program running within you. So those 7 seals that Yeshua was releasing from Mary are actually the esoteric significance of no longer having those 7 planetary spheres influenced. So you're no longer under those influences. What that would do is bring you into enlightenment. So that story is a part of all of the mythos around Mary, but the mythos around Mary from the esoteric layer. If she is the symbol of the full, complete hero's journey, the one who goes into the world now awakening, who experiences all of the different trials, all of the different tribulations and challenges that happen while you're awakening, this would be the part of the storyline where she gets baptized, she gets born again, and no longer goes from being a seeker who's going through all of these challenges and all of these tests. Releasing those 7 planetary influences from her field would now mean that there is a rebirth, would now mean that she is going into a state of seeker into initiate. And then from seeker into initiate, what you have is a fully initiated being. The esoteric symbolism of Mary Magdalene is called ascent of the soul, and the casting out of the 7 demons is esoteric knowledge, where the 7 demons are 7 dimensions that each represent an attachment to the physical identity that keeps us earthbound. The first is the material world's illusion of separation. This disconnection is known as darkness. The second is the ego's desire to cling to its illusions and its projections, rather than accept disillusionment. The third attachment is ignorance of our divinity and the spiritual amnesia that makes us forget that we are source. A zeal for death, which can be seen as the energy of addiction. Addiction to the physical and all the extreme ways we abuse ourselves through addiction. The 5th archon realm is worshiping the material world and regarding the physical identity as the only real self above all, having no connection to the spiritual world and worshiping physical logic and the physical senses as superior. And lastly, a wisdom based on wrath. This is when our inner moral code is absent, and in its place, there is only vengeance that creates a karmic loop or a karmic wheel. The archons did not like Mary because she was teaching people how to awaken their inner divinity. Women were leaders in esoterica. This fact is even still distorted today in a world that literally wants to demonize women of their wisdom and natural ability to lead. But the idea of women as esoteric leaders and spiritual authorities authorities was not made out to be an evil and unnatural thing until the church had fully branded that into the mind of modern people, that it was unnatural. Because of this, even to this day, we see Mary Magdalene's true status and role is reduced to a disciple, if she's even acknowledged at all. And so you see Mary Magdalene's journey here as the microcosm version of her higher expression, the force that she represents, but she's just in human form. Her higher self, or her higher expression, the macrocosm force of Mary Magdalene, is Sophia. To learn all about Sophia, you can watch my series on Gaia, Mystery Teachings, where I do a full episode on Sophia. So Sophia is her higher expression, and her human expression is Mary Magdalene. The same way that Christ is the higher expression, is the higher force behind the human avatar of Yeshua. So Mary Magdalene and Yeshua are divine counterparts on a mission, and that whole mission in the esoteric layer of it, the esoteric significance, is the mission of descent into the material realm, and then going through the material realm through an awakening process of remembrance, and then going back through an ascent of the soul. So in this case, Yeshua represents the force that helps Mary through the awakening process. What usually gets left out of the equation is the feminine's role inside the ascent process. And so the feminine's role inside the ascent process is also to lead, initiate, and guide the divine counterpart, male spiritual figure. That just got left out because the church wanted to literally create a whole different paradigm that not only obscured the power behind Mary, but diminished all of her power. In fact, the term Mary is actually a title. The same way that we say doctor before a person's name, and the term doctor is a title that's meant for us to understand that they have a certain amount of knowledge in a certain field. It's the same for the term Mary. Mary is a title of a high priestess. Not only a high priestess, one who is of a high level initiation. So it's an initiative female in the female mysteries. That's why also you see inside the Bible that there's so many Marys, and then that gets confused. And so then they go and they look inside the footnotes that one scribe wrote over and then crossed out, and then the next scribe comes and writes over and crosses out, and then the next scribe, all like within a century, there's these different footnotes that are crossed out by different scribes, and that's because the scribes were confused. The scribes kept writing, there was this Mary by Yeshua, and then this Mary, and then this Mary, and they were talking about different Marys because they were confused, because the term Mary is a title. So there were probably several Marys around Yeshua. But what made Mary Magdalene such a threat to the whole matrix and to the powers that were, that the other Marys weren't necessarily such a target of, was that there are timeline wars, believe it or not. And Mary's power was able to somehow recorrect the timelines. Anytime the timeline wars for whatever the dominant timeline that humanity would experience were becoming so distorted. In fact, timeline wars happen all the time. It's this weird thing that happens when you're in time in the first place. And when you're of a higher understanding of this reality, you could use that higher understanding of this reality for better or for worse. And one of the worst things is you can distort the past. You can distort timelines. And so one could say that the whole battle between spiritual forces of benevolence and good and spiritual forces of service to self and the negative forces are ones that are battling through timelines, through a timeline war. We see this all the time inside the Bible. How many times do we see a line from the Bible and then we're like, wait, it's not that line anymore. It's this new line. Or wait, it's not that one classic biblical saying anymore. It's this saying now. That's more than just Mandela effects. It's a Mandela effect because there's timeline wars going on, which is why if you raise your consciousness above needing the Bible, you can respect it as an esoteric source of esoteric wisdom without becoming chained to it fundamentally. You won't need it. You'll simply have outgrown it at a certain point. And there's many Gnostic forces that are helping to always rewrite the past in positive ways, simply because there's always negative forces that are trying to enslave humanity in very detrimental ways. Mary Magdalene was deep inside the center of this timelines war. She had such power where she would be able to recorrect timelines, which made her an absolute threat that they needed to turn into such a lower consciousness perversion of what divine feminine energy is. That's why they had to make such a strong smear campaign on her. Now, all of this leads us to another esoteric significance of this archetype of the hero's journey played out through Mary. The esoteric significance is that there is deep levels of targeting, gang stalking, and persecution that is linked with having spiritual and divine powers here in the earthly terrain. You even see this with Yeshua. You'll see deep levels of persecution, energy, and even leading to metaphorical, symbolic crucifixion. This is what happens when higher level spiritual intelligence does something very enlightening to the world, or acts as a powerful force of enlightening others, of awakening others. You'll see that they end up taking on this Yeshua or Mary archetype, this archetypal struggle of being persecuted, being specifically targeted for their power to awaken, and then from that, going through massive gaslighting, going through a complete revision of who they are, their mission, and what they stand for, so that they revise even the message of that messenger, and going through all of the tarnishing of their reputation, all of the ways that you can find somebody's weak spot and then exploit it and convert it into something demonic. This is what happens when higher level consciousness enters the material realm and tries to awaken others. So this is also deeply an archetype of Mary Magdalene being persecuted to the point where everyone has thought she was simply just a poor prostitute this whole time. And even with Yeshua, having the metaphorical crucifixion because of his role in awakening others. So this all belongs, the crucifixion, the smear campaigning, and the slandering into prostitution. These are all different dynamics. Both, you could look at it like feminine and masculine dynamics contained within these archetypes of the hero's journey. But now this time played out through what happens, the persecution that happens when higher consciousness goes into the material realm for the intent of awakening and for the intent of ascent. You will get misunderstood at best, gang stalked at worst. So hopefully we can revise this archetypal template, but I'm simply explaining the esoteric significance of this archetype and template. Now, in the gospel text, the Gospel of Mary, what we see about Mary is that she is the best student of Yeshua's. Remember, I don't believe she was just a student at all. I feel she was far more powerful than that, and even was an equal to Yeshua, meaning she taught him and helped him just as much as he taught her and led her. And that would be the Eros Gamos ascent. But in the Gospel of Mary, you at least see that Mary was a high enough student of Yeshua's that he only taught her stuff that he didn't even teach the other disciples. And inside the Gospel of Mary, she is vividly telling the other disciples in full, thorough, fleshed out detail everything that he had taught her before he ascended. And so inside that gospel, it's important even to this day, because what it covers without explicitly saying it is it's covering those 7 planetary spheres and the different archonic influences of each. So for instance, we don't think of zeal for death as a relevant theme typically, and yet you'll see her explain how zeal for death is an archonic influential realm that you will have to relinquish, you will have to purify yourself from in order to go into higher realms and leave this earthly terrain. So a zeal for death, what's that all about? Because out of all of the different ones that she talks about inside that gospel, zeal for death is the most obscure, until you understand that at that time period, many people were promoting a zeal, an excitement, an enthusiasm for being a martyr. And that can still be an ego trap. That can still be an ego trap for a few different reasons. One, because it's very strong into the fixed identity, the fixed ego identity of a person. But then also because it could be one of those things that we know in this age now is like the soul trap, where you're talking to specific beings and thinking that you need to go back to earth and help others and all of that. Like, that is still the more obscure tone that the zeal for death could take on. It's not said explicitly. It's just, if you understand the energy behind that, you can now start seeing in modern times, and even in some astral encounters, how that would take place, how you would be like, oh, I have to come back to Earth. I have to help humanity in some way. None of that is to say that there's not actual Blu-ray beings here. Okay, you could be a celestial being on a mission still. I am just saying that there's a difference between being a bodhisattva or being, a high-level spiritual consciousness who comes here with their own free will to help others. That is different than this realm. In this realm, it's almost like you have to, she's explaining the lessons in the ego identity that need to become aware of and deprogrammed before you can go into the next realms. In fact, one of the most vital themes in all of esoterica is the purification of the body, mind, and spirit before the death process. That way, when you're going through these different planetary spheres or these different realms, you're more conscious, you're more coherent, your spirit is strengthened. So this means that you're able to go through the full liberation into spiritual sovereignty rather than get hung up or blocked in any one of these spiritual dimensions known through the planets. In fact, the Gospel of Mary is known for its heavy similarities with Middle Platonism. The themes of creation and salvation are not portrayed through external obedience and hellfire imagery. The real definition of sin, according to this text, is that there is none, the way that we know it. Sin is the state of spiritual amnesia. It is to mistake your lower, base nature for your immortal soul. So, the esoteric significance of Mary Magdalene is that she is the full hero's arc from a person lost in spiritual amnesia, wandering the material plane, into a fully enlightened high priestess of the dragon lineage, from sinner to saint, from lost to found, from blind to sight. So between the historical Mary Magdalene and the esoteric Mary Magdalene, and even the general mythos of Mary Magdalene, there is so much heavily obscured and not much we can say for certain. But in her esoteric symbology, what she represents is not only descent and ascent through the hero's journey. She represents the map to navigate the planetary spheres into enlightenment. I hope this has helped you unveil Mary. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.